Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we take a whole stack of sources, research, articles, you name it, and really try to pull out the most important insights for you.
That's right.
And today, we're tackling a subject that, well, many people think is pretty settled, or maybe just a private matter, male circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't going to be just a history lesson. The pater we're digging into, the cut that won't heal, really throws down a challenge to the usual story.
It really does.
It argues this practice isn't simply about tradition or health, but it's actually a profound, non-consensual modification of the body. And it asks a tough question. Why does it keep going? Especially for infants, for those who can't consent. What's the cost?
Exactly. And our goal here in this deep dive is to extract those key insights from the material. We'll be using some interesting theoretical tools like Audrey Alejandro's idea of technicization.
Technicization. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's basically how a complex, often ethically loaded practice gets sort of reframed. It's presented as purely objective, purely medical, stripping away all the messy social and ethical stuff.
Oh, I do.
And we'll explore how circumcision specifically has been, well, systematically depoliticized, kind of walled off into just medicine that's disciplinarization and detached from its social context, desociologized.
So get ready for a real mix. We're talking religious history, gender theory, public health policy, and importantly, the voices of circumcised individuals, which you often don't hear.
Yeah, there should be some surprising moments, maybe some things that make you really rethink your perspective.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right, first stop is what the paper calls circumcision at the crossroads. And right away, it confronts this normalization, infant male circumcision being treated as
Right.
just rather.
Maybe beneficial.
Yeah, routine. Despite the pretty undeniable fact that it's done to people who literally cannot consent, can't resist, can't even understand what's happening to them. It's a direct challenge, isn't it? To all the common justifications you hear, oh, it's religion, it's culture, it's vaguely healthier.
Right, yeah.
The paper argues it sticks around because of this strange mix, part inertia, just doing what's always been done, part ideology, and part just institutional neglect, really.
It paints a picture of this convergence like ancient symbols bumping up against, 19th century pseudoscience?
Exactly. And colonial ideas about hygiene and even the way modern healthcare is structured, the capitalist side of it, it's quite a tangle.
And this is where that technicization idea comes in again.
Precisely. How something so personal gets repackaged in objective medical terms, and then bam, you hit these statistics, like Bollinger's 2010 work, estimating, get this, 117 infant deaths every single year in the U.S.
Wow.
from complications related to circumcision.
117 infant deaths annually from an elective procedure. I mean, just pause on that. That number would be completely unacceptable for almost any other non-essential thing we do to kids medically.
Totally unacceptable.
It forces you to ask, how can a practice with these kinds of documented risks done without consent be so common, normal? It definitely makes you look twice at what we consider routine.
Yeah, so, okay, that's the modern picture of the crossroads we're at. But to really get why it persists, the paper argues we need to peel back that medical veneer.
Go back in time.
Yeah, go back to the ancient roots, the myths it grew out of.
Okay, so that takes us into historical origins and myth-making. And the big myth being busted here is what? That it started for health reasons.
Bingo. The idea that it began for hygiene or medical benefit. The reality, much older, much more about ritual, covenant, cosmology, not science.
So it wasn't utilitarian.
Not primarily, no. Silverman explains how in Judaism it was fundamentally about the covenant, a physical sign, a mark of belonging, of obedience.
Okay.
Which is very different from, say, ancient Egypt or parts of Africa or Arabia, where it might have been a puberty rite, or linked to fertility or group identity, or a kind of social purification. Again, not primarily medical.
And Darby's point about hygiene being a modern projection, that's fascinating, sort of layering our current obsessions onto the past.
Right. And think about the paradox. This procedure was done for centuries before antibiotics. The risks, infection, bleeding, death must have been significant.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it persisted. Why? Because the goal wasn't physical health as we think of it. It was about social meaning, marking bodies, even normalizing suffering as part of belonging. It really makes you question how we tidy up history, doesn't it? Ignoring the painful bits.
Definitely. And Silverman's point about the penis becoming a site of divine interaction.
Yeah. Powerful phrase, isn't it? Where cutting signified belonging, obedience, submission to sacred law.
Yet that completely blows up the idea that it was ever just a simple medical thing.
Exactly. Understanding those non-medical roots really shifts how you see the modern justifications, I think.
So, okay, born of myth, born of symbol, how does this ancient ritual jump into the modern West? Not through science, you're saying, but through a different kind of myth.
A totally different kind. Fear and morality. That leads us straight into the Victorian panic morality, masturbation, and medical myths.
Ah, the Victorians.
Indeed. This chapter shows how circumcision got this shocking rebrand. Suddenly, it's a medical cure for masturbation and even seen as a tool against social decay.
And this wasn't based on, like, actual studies.
Not at all. It was driven by intense puritanical anxiety. You had doctors like James Copland, sanitarians like W.H. Corfield, explicitly linking the foreskin to the habit, masturbation and moral rot. Darby documents this really well.
Wow.
And it gets even more extreme. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. Yes, the cornflakes guy.
No way.
Yes. He actually argued for doing circumcision without anesthesia, believing, and this is a direct quote, the brief pain attending the operation will have a salutary effect upon the mind, especially if it be connected with the idea of punishment.
Pain as punishment. That's chilling.
Isn't it? It just demolishes any notion that this was always about health. It was about control, moral judgment.
And it became routine then, without consent, without discussion.
Absolutely. And the paper hammers home that this medicalization was built on what Darby calls ideological sand. Assumptions about cleanliness, racial superiority, all masked as science.
So the scalpel entering the nursery wasn't about health, but fear, sexual repression. That's quite a legacy to unpack today.
It really is. So, okay, we've gone from ancient covenants to Victorian panic. How did this ethically questionable practice get, laundered? Presented as neutral in our supposedly data-driven world.
That's where technicization comes back in.
Exactly. That brings us to the myth of neutrality, technicization, and the language of medical legitimacy.
So how does that work in practice? What kind of language are we talking about?
Think about terms like risk reduction, procedure, prophylaxis. These words are used to technicize circumcision. They systematically strip away the sociopolitical meaning. That's Alejandro's framework in action.
It sounds like a deliberate strategy.
The paper argues it is, turning something morally loaded into a neat, manageable solution. Alejandro points to 3 key ways this happens. First, depoliticization, making it seem like pure science, not belief. Think about the big WHO push for circumcision in Africa for HIV prevention, often downplaying the cultural context.
All right.
Second, disciplinarization, keeping the conversation strictly within medicine. Ethicists, anthropologists, their views get marginalized. It's a medical issue. End of story.
And the third?
Desociologization, erasing the social context. Race, religion, class, history, all that gets wiped away to make it seem universal. Like ignoring why rates are higher among certain groups in the U.S., like low-income and minority infants.
That's pretty sneaky, actually, this linguistic laundering.
It is insidious. It allows the practice to just kind of fly under the radar of moral accountability. It hides the roots in Victorian repression, religious conformity, colonial ideas.
It turns a, let's face it, violent, irreversible bodily modification, as the paper puts it, into just another clinical procedure.
Precisely. It really makes you wonder about other areas where seemingly neutral medical language might be hiding some deep ethical issues or power dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. But this language trick, this technicization, it wouldn't work without something else, right? Medicine basically claiming ownership.
Exactly. Which leads us to the next piece, disciplinary capture. How did medicine basically take over the whole conversation?
Okay, chapter 5. Disciplinary capture, how medicine took over the conversation. How did they manage that?
Well, the paper describes how biomedicine asserts this exclusive authority. It pushes ethical, cultural, psychological questions to the side. What matters most becomes surgical technique, public health numbers.
So much for a stable scientific consensus.
Right. Think about the American Academy of Pediatrics' 2012 statement saying the benefits outweigh the risks. That was immediately contradicted by major health bodies in Europe, Canada, Australia.
So not exactly unified.
Not at all. And it shows how medical institutions often rely heavily on their own internal studies, sometimes marginalizing critical research from outside.
And that statistic you mentioned earlier, Bollinger's estimate of over 100 infant deaths a year in the U.S.
largely ignored by the major pediatric groups, according to the paper. It's a stark example of this disciplinary self-insulation.
Wow.
Medicine can end up reducing the body to just a biological machine, ignoring psychological effects, ignoring children's rights in a way that just wouldn't happen with, say, female genital cutting.
Right, the contrast is stark there. It really makes you question who gets to decide what counts as science or expertise when these big ethical questions are involved.
But it's not just who gets to speak, it's also what gets left out of the conversation. This capture goes hand in hand with the race and context.
Making it seem like circumcision just exists in a bubble, separate from race, class, gender, power.
Exactly. Which brings us to the context, erase desociologization, and the vanishing of power.
So this is about stripping away the history and the social meaning again.
Precisely. Desociologization, making it look universal, apolitical, totally unproblematic.
But it's not.
Far from it. The paper calls it a rhetorical vanishing act. It hides the deep connections to hierarchies, race, religion, class, ideas about masculinity, even colonial power.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about those mass circumcision campaigns in sub-Saharan Africa, the VMMC programs. They're often framed in purely neutral public health terms.
Right, for HIV prevention.
But they operate within complex histories, often linked to colonial legacies, and there are reports of coercion or at least pressure involved. Or in the U.S., the fact that rates are higher among low-income groups and minorities, and how Medicaid funding plays a role that context often just disappears from the main discussion.
And what about gender and sexuality? You mentioned that earlier.
Completely filtered out in most medical talk. Its history is tied up with shaping masculinity, controlling sexuality. But you wouldn't know it from the standard medical literature.
It gets reduced to just a procedure.
Yeah, as if, and the paper uses this striking analogy, removing a foreskin were no more complex than clipping a toenail.
Wow. That's a chilling level of taking things out of context.
It is, and it should make you look really critically at any supposedly objective discussion, medical policy, whatever, that seems to conveniently ignore the messy social realities.
So erasing context, controlling the story, that allows some pretty shaky justifications to survive, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Which leads us to maybe one of the most persistent and frankly kind of ridiculous myths, the wartime Sam story.
Yes, the sand story, Chapter 7. Sand and circumcision medical myth-making in wartime and beyond. What's the supposed story here?
The myth goes that uncircumcised soldiers fighting in deserts like North Africa in World War II were getting terrible, even fatal penile infections because sand got trapped under the foreskin.
So mass circumcisions were needed for hygiene.
That's the story. But Darby absolutely demolishes it, calls it out directly. This myth has no factual basis.
No factual basis at all. No epidemics, no orders.
Nope. It was, according to the research, an elaborate post hoc rationalization, basically making up a story after the fact, a parable to prop up the idea that circumcision was cleaner, better.
That's kind of amazing in its absurdity.
Isn't it? It just shows how institutions can swap stories for actual data when they need to support a conclusion they already like. It reveals the malleability of medical discourse.
Meaning the justifications keep changing.
Exactly. First it's epilepsy, then cancer, then sexual discipline. Now it's sandproofing. But the procedure itself just keeps rolling along.
It really makes you think about how easily stories become policy, how folklore can dress up as medical fact.
So we've seen how medical myths get spun, but myths aren't just in medicine or war stories. They're deep in religion, too, especially Jewish circumcision, which many see as sort of untouchable. But is it?
Okay, shifting gears. Chapter 8. Covenant or conflict, resistance and reinterpretation within Jewish circumcision discourse.
Yeah.
Challenging the idea that it's a settled issue even within Judaism.
Exactly. Challenging the view that it's this fixed, non-negotiable thing.
Because it's not.
Well, the paper shows it's actually a contested, evolving practice within Judaism itself. Silverman talks about its incredible symbolic weight, its density, but that very complexity opens it up to reinterpretation.
Like how?
Well, there's historical resistance. Back in the 19th century, some Reform communities actually substituted Brit Shalom, a welcoming or naming ceremony, but without the cutting.
Interesting. And today?
Today, you have contemporary Jewish critics raising ethical questions, feminist critiques. It's not a monolithic view.
And what about practices like, isn't there one involving oral suction?
Yes, exactly. And there's been significant debate and public health concern around that practice, even within observant communities. It shows there's discomfort, there's ongoing discussion,
So criticizing it isn't automatically anti-Jewish.
not according to the scholars cited here. They frame it as part of a long-respected tradition of internal debate and argument within Judaism itself. And Silverman makes this really interesting point, that the very symbolic weight of circumcision might actually make it more open to critique, not less. Because the meaning is so profound, it demands constant ethical engagement.
Huh. That kind of flips the script on tradition being untouchable. It suggests traditions have to evolve ethically.
Precisely. It broadens the whole conversation about consent and ethics, even for deeply held practices.
Okay, so we've looked at religious tradition grappling with itself. Now, where are we going? You mentioned masculinity earlier.
Right. We're shifting from the specifics of tradition to look at how circumcision, really across the board, religious, colonial, medical contexts, is deeply tangled up with ideas about what it means to be male.
It's not just a snip. It's about defining manhood.
In many ways, yes. That takes us to Chapter 9, cutting to the core masculinity, sex, and the gender politics of circumcision.
And the myth here is the medical neutrality again, hiding the gender aspect.
Exactly. That neutral veneer hides how deeply gendered it is, how it connects to what kind of masculinity is seen as okay, as sanctioned.
How so? What are the connections?
Well, think about that common Hoke idea. It makes a boy into a man. That pops up in various ways. Silverman even describes some interpretations as a symbolic act, first feminization, then purification, removing the soft, excessive, penetrable foreskin.
To reveal a hardened masculine core.
Yeah, and remember the Victorians. They explicitly linked it to controlling male sexuality, masturbation, homosexuality.
Right.
Even today's rhetoric about reduced STI risk. It subtly implies the intact body is somehow dirty or dangerous. It promotes this idea of a, sanitized, disciplined, responsible masculinity.
Which brings us back to that double standard with female genital cutting.
The elephant in the room? Absolutely. Both remove healthy tissue without consent. Both are gendered. Both can harm. But the global response is utterly different.
One is condemned, the other is a choice, a procedure.
It's a glaring hypocrisy, and the paper suggests it reflects a cultural discomfort with male vulnerability. Male pain is often only seen as acceptable if it serves some purpose, builds strength.
It really makes you think how hidden gender norms shape what we accept as normal medicine.
Definitely. And this constructed idea of male health, male control, it didn't just stay in the West. It went global.
Okay, so now we're shifting from the personal and cultural to the political stage. How this practice spread under the banner of public health.
Exactly. With some really problematic neocolonial overtones. That's Chapter 10, Globalizing the Cut, Public Health, Consent in Neocolonial Medicine.
And the myth here is VMMC, voluntary medical male circumcision, as this straightforward HIV solution.
Yes. The rebranding of circumcision as this global health fix, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and the big myth attached to that, voluntary consent.
Why is that a myth? Isn't it voluntary?
The paper strongly questions that magic bullet story. First, the stats that 50–60% reduction in HIV risk. It only applies to female-to-male transmission. In heterosexual sex under specific conditions. It doesn't magically fix the whole epidemic.
And it doesn't address the root causes: poverty, gender inequality.
Exactly. Those structural drivers are key. Plus, the voluntary part is described as increasingly questionable. There's documented evidence of coercion, misinformation, playing down the risks involved for the men and boys undergoing it.
And the neo-colonial angle.
The paper calls the dynamic especially grotesque. You have circumcision rates falling or being questioned in the West,
While it's being actively promoted in the global South.
by often the same health authorities. Cautious at home, evangelists abroad. It leads to this quote: "The body of the African boy becomes a canvas for foreign donors to inscribe health policy."
That's a powerful image, and a disturbing one.
It really makes you scrutinize those big global health initiatives.
Yeah.
How often can good intentions mask interventions that are ethically flawed or even harmful?
Yeah. Okay, so we've gone from global policy right down to the individual level now. Because behind all the policies in history, there's a person, a body.
A body that remembers the cut. Absolutely. What's the actual toll, emotional, psychological, physical, especially when those voices aren't heard?
That sets up Chapter 11. The cut that lingers, trauma, memory, and the silenced voices of circumcised men. And the myth being challenged is that it doesn't really leave a mark, because it's done to infants.
Precisely. The myth that because it's quick, done early, it's basically insignificant, especially psychologically, the paper argues this erases the long-term impact.
But infants do feel pain intensely. We know that now.
We absolutely do. And early trauma can have profound effects on a developing brain. That's well established. And let's not forget Bollinger's estimate, again, over 100 infant deaths a year in the U.S. from complications, often unreported or downplayed.
And what about those who survive but have lifelong issues? Scarring, sexual problems, feeling alienated from their own bodies?
They're often dismissed, ignored. The paper talks about a double silencing.
Double silencing.
First, the silencing by the surgery itself, done without their consent. Then, silenced again by the discourse. Adult men who express anger, grief, or regret about being circumcised are often mocked, told they're exaggerating, even pathologized.
Why? To maintain the status quo.
It preserves the illusion of consensus, protects the institutions involved, and crucially, their personal testimony is rarely considered valid data in mainstream medical research.
Even though, as the paper points out, many justifications for circumcision are basically just cultural stories passed off as facts.
Exactly. It's a profound imbalance. It really forces you to ask, what does it mean to truly listen? Especially when someone's lived experience makes us uncomfortable or challenges cherished beliefs.
Yeah. Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground: history, myths, politics, the personal cost. Where do we go from here? What's the final step?
The final step is moving from understanding the problem to demanding ethical clarity. After everything we've unpacked, what's the bottom line on consent, tradition, and frankly, institutional cowardice?
All right, Chapter 12, the finale. No more excuses, bodily autonomy, ethical clarity, and the case against circumcision. This sounds like where the gloves come off.
I think that's fair to say. The paper argues for a clear, unequivocal stance.
Okay, so after all this, what's the core message?
The core message is this. Circumcision is not neutral. It is not benign. And it is absolutely not just a personal decision made by parents for someone else.
It's framed as what then?
As a permanent, non-consensual alteration of another human being's healthy body, done for reasons that, when you really examine them, crumble under scrutiny.
So time to tear down those justifications. It's cleaner.
Not supported by robust evidence comparing intact hygiene practices. HIV risk, highly specific context, doesn't justify universal non-consensual surgery. It's religious. Religions evolve and internal dissent exists. He won't remember it. Infants feel pain, trauma matters, and lack of memory doesn't equal lack of harm.
What about everyone else is doing it? Or parents saying, it was done to me and I'm fine?
Peer pressure isn't an ethical justification. And the weaponized nostalgia, as the paper implies, defending what happened to you doesn't negate the child's right to bodily autonomy.
Bottom line being,
There is no medical condition that universally requires routine infant circumcision. There is no ethical framework that supports cutting off healthy body parts from children without their consent. There is no genuine scientific consensus justifying it as a default practice.
the paper draws a comparison, doesn't it? Like tattooing a child's face or removing an earlobe.
Exactly. The outrage would be instant, universal. Why the difference? And the hypocrisy compared to female genital cutting, it's glaring.
The difference is political, cultural, not moral.
That's the argument. Both remove healthy tissue without consent. Both are gendered. Both carry risks. The condemnation of one versus the normalization of the other is a profound ethical inconsistency.
And even if the health benefits were undisputed, which they aren't.
It wouldn't matter from a core ethical standpoint. You don't preemptively amputate healthy body parts because of the potential future risk reduction, especially when that risk can be managed by other means, like, education and safe practices later in life.
So the fundamental ethical failure is
Treating a child not as a person with rights, but as a passive site. A place for parents to enact their will, for religious tradition to leave its mark, for public health strategy to experiment, denying their basic ownership of their own body.
okay. So stripping it all back.
Circumcision is a human rights issue, full stop. It's a consent issue. It's a medical ethics failure. It is, fundamentally, a practice desperately searching for a justification that holds up.
And the only morally consistent position, according to this analysis,
Opposition, rooted in the simple, fundamental principle. Every human being owns their own body. You don't cut healthy children to fit tradition or soothe adult fears or meet statistical targets. Ethical medicine requires consent, period.
no more cutting?
No more cutting.
Wow. Okay.
No
That was a lot
statutory
slower.
Cut.
We've really journeyed through the complexities, exposing how this practice, far from being simple or neutral, is deeply tangled in issues of autonomy and rights. This deep dive really underscores how urgent it is to look at this again with fresh, critical eyes. We genuinely hope this is giving you, our listeners, a tremendous amount to consider.
Indeed, and maybe leaves you with a final thought to wrestle with. What does true consent really look like? Not just for kids, but in all our traditions or institutions. And how far are we really willing to go as individuals and as a society to uphold it?